Sarah Martinez had been the voice of hope for over 15 years. Every morning at 6 sharp, her warm, melodic voice would flow through the radio waves of KWIN 94.5, reaching thousands of listeners across the small mountain town of Cedar Ridge. She was more than just a radio host. She was the heartbeat of the community, the first person people turned to during emergencies, celebrations, and everything in between. The cancer came suddenly, like a thief in the night. One day Sarah was laughing on air about her failed attempts at baking sourdough bread, and 3 months later, she was gone. The entire town mourned her passing. Her funeral drew people from neighboring counties, all coming to pay their respects to the woman who had been their daily companion for so many years. Sarah's husband, Michael, could barely function in those first weeks after her death. Their small house felt impossibly empty without her voice filling every corner. He couldn't bring himself to turn on the radio. The silence where her voice should have been was too painful to bear. Their 2 teenage children, Emma and David, tried to maintain some sense of normalcy, but grief hung over the family like a heavy blanket. The radio station struggled too. KWIN had tried to fill Sarah's morning slot with various temporary hosts, but nobody could match her unique blend of warmth, humor, and genuine care for the community. Ratings plummeted, and station manager Robert Chin worried about the future of the small independent station that Sarah had helped build from nothing. 3 weeks after the funeral, Michael finally returned to work at the local hardware store. Emma went back to her senior year of high school, and David resumed his sophomore classes. They were all trying to move forward, to honor Sarah's memory by continuing to live, even though every day felt like walking through fog. It was on a Tuesday morning, exactly 21 days after Sarah had been laid to rest in Cedar Ridge Cemetery, that everything changed. Michael was getting ready for work, mechanically going through his morning routine, when he heard something that made his blood run cold. From the kitchen radio, the old blue Motorola that Sarah had insisted on keeping despite its crackling speakers, came a familiar sound. It was Sarah's voice, not a recording or a replay of an old show. This was live, happening right now, with Sarah discussing the morning weather and mentioning events that were happening today. Michael stood frozen in his kitchen, coffee mug trembling in his hands, as his deceased wife's voice filled the room with the same warmth and energy she'd always brought to her broadcasts. Good morning, Cedar Ridge. It's a beautiful Tuesday morning, and I hope you're all having a wonderful start to your day. The weather's looking great, partly cloudy with a high of 72 degrees. Don't forget that the school board meeting has been moved to Thursday evening at 7, and the annual Autumn Festival Planning Committee is meeting tonight at the community center. Michael's legs gave out, and he collapsed into a kitchen chair. This wasn't possible. He had watched them lower Sarah's casket into the ground. He had thrown dirt on her grave. Yet here was her voice, as clear and present as if she were standing right next to him. Across town, similar scenes were playing out in homes, businesses, and cars throughout Cedar Ridge. At Chin's Electronics, old Mr. Chun was staring at his radio display model in complete bewilderment. In the high school parking lot, Emma Martinez sat in her car, tears streaming down her face as she listened to her mother's impossible voice, welcoming everyone to a new day. But the strangest part wasn't just that Sarah's voice had returned from beyond the grave. It was that she seemed to know things, current things that had happened after her death. She mentioned the new stoplight that had been installed on Main Street just last week. She talked about the Hendersons' new baby, born 5 days ago. She even referenced the storm that had knocked out power to the north side of town yesterday evening. At Quinn's modest studio on the outskirts of town, Robert Chun was having what might generously be called a complete breakdown. The voice was coming through their equipment, broadcasting on their frequency, but there was no one in the studio. The building had been locked since yesterday evening, and the security system showed no signs of entry. Yet somehow, Sarah Martinez was on the air, hosting her show as if nothing had ever happened. The phone lines at the station lit up like a Christmas tree. Callers ranged from hysterical to demanding explanations to convinced they were witnessing a miracle. Some people claimed it had to be a hoax, that someone was playing a cruel joke using old recordings. But, as the broadcast continued, it became clear that this was something far more mysterious and impossible than any simple prank. Sarah's voice continued for exactly 2 hours, her normal show length. She played music, took calls from bewildered listeners, and even did her famous morning trivia segment. She spoke to callers by name, asked about their families, and showed knowledge of recent events in their lives. When Mrs. Patterson called in crying about her husband's recent diagnosis, Sarah comforted her with the same gentle compassion she'd always shown, offering specific advice about the new oncology center that had opened 2 towns over, a facility that hadn't even existed when Sarah was alive. As the show neared its end, Sarah's voice took on a more serious tone. "I want everyone in Cedar Ridge to know how much you've meant to me over the years. This community has been my heart and soul, and even though things might seem different now, I want you to know that love doesn't end just because life does. Take care of each other. And remember that sometimes the most important messages come from the most unexpected places." The transmission ended at exactly 8 o'clock, just as Sarah's show always had. The silence that followed felt different somehow, not empty, but full of questions and possibilities that no one could begin to understand. Michael sat in his kitchen long after the radio had gone quiet, staring at the old blue Motorola as if it might offer some explanation for what had just happened. Part of him wondered if he was losing his mind, if grief had finally pushed him over the edge into complete delusion. But the ringing phone told a different story. Emma was calling, her voice shaky and confused. "Dad, did you hear Mom on the radio this morning?" The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore and equally impossible to explain. Across Cedar Ridge, families were having similar conversations, trying to make sense of what they'd all experienced together. The town's morning routine had been shattered by the return of a voice that should have been silenced forever, and no one had any idea what it meant or what might happen next. Word of Sarah's impossible broadcast spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire. By noon, the story had reached the regional news stations, and, by evening, reporters from 3 major networks had descended on the small mountain town. The KWIN studio became ground zero for what some were calling a hoax, others a miracle, and still others the most significant paranormal event in decades. Dr. Patricia Reeves, a professor of electrical engineering from the State University, arrived on Wednesday morning with a team of graduate students and enough electronic equipment to stock a small laboratory. She'd spent her career debunking supposed supernatural phenomena, always finding logical explanations for seemingly impossible events. But as she examined the KWIN studio equipment, her confidence began to waver. "There's no evidence of tampering," she told Robert Chun, her voice tight with frustration. "No hidden transmitters, no unauthorized access to your equipment, no signs that anyone has been in this building since Monday night. According to your security logs and the physical evidence, this broadcast should have been impossible." Chun had barely slept since Tuesday morning. The phone hadn't stopped ringing, and his small staff was overwhelmed by the attention. "You're telling me there's no explanation for what happened?" Dr. Reeves adjusted her glasses and looked at the modest radio equipment that had somehow channeled a dead woman's voice. "I'm telling you there's no conventional explanation. The signal definitely originated from your equipment, but there's no source for that signal that makes any sense according to the laws of physics." Meanwhile, Michael Martinez was dealing with his own invasion. Reporters camped outside his house. Paranormal investigators knocked on his door at all hours, and well-meaning neighbors stopped by constantly to share their theories about what had happened. Emma and David were struggling to attend school normally while dealing with the constant stares and whispered conversations that followed them everywhere. The family decided to stay with Michael's brother in the next town until the media attention died down. As they packed their bags on Wednesday evening, Michael made a decision that surprised even himself. He carefully unplugged the old blue Motorola and wrapped it in a towel, placing it gently in a box. "Dad, what are you doing?" Emma asked, watching him handle the radio like it was made of glass. "I don't know," Michael admitted. "But if your mother is if she's trying to communicate, I don't want to miss it." Thursday morning came and went without any unusual radio activity. KWIN aired its regular programming, and Dr. Reeves's equipment detected nothing out of the ordinary. Some people in town began to relax, convinced that Tuesday's event had been a one-time occurrence, whatever it had been. But Sarah's voice returned on Friday morning, once again at exactly 6 o'clock. This time, Michael was ready. He had set up the blue Motorola in his brother's garage and was recording everything on his phone. Emma and David sat with him, all three of them staring at the radio as Sarah's familiar voice once again filled the space around them. Good morning, Cedar Ridge. I hope everyone is doing well despite all the excitement this week. I know things have been confusing, and I wish I could explain everything, but some answers take time to unfold. Sarah's tone was different this morning, more direct, more purposeful. She seemed aware of the chaos her previous broadcast had caused, and she addressed it head-on. I want to talk to my family today, if that's okay with everyone. Michael, Emma, David, I know you're listening, and I know this is frightening and confusing. I need you to understand that I'm okay. I'm more okay than I've been in months, actually. The pain is gone, and I can see things more clearly now than I ever could before. Michael's hand shook as he held the phone, recording every word. Emma was crying silently, and David sat frozen, unable to process what he was hearing. There are things I need to tell you, things I learned too late. Michael, remember the box in our bedroom closet, behind the winter coats? The one I told you never to open? It's time. Emma, your college application essay. The one about overcoming adversity. You need to change the ending. Write about hope instead of just survival. And, David, I know you blame yourself for not visiting me more in the hospital. I need you to stop carrying that guilt. The broadcast continued for another hour, with Sarah sharing specific messages for various community members. She told Mrs. Chun about her son's upcoming job interview and gave her advice to pass along. She mentioned that the Hendersons' new baby would have a heart condition that wouldn't be detected for another month without proper testing. She warned that the old bridge on County Road 15 was more damaged than anyone realized and needed immediate inspection. But it was the personal messages that left the biggest impact. Sarah spoke to her family with an intimacy and knowledge that would have been impossible to fake. She mentioned private conversations, inside jokes, and family memories that no outsider could have known. I can't stay long, she said as the show neared its end. These connections take more energy than I have, and I can feel myself getting weaker each time. But I needed you all to know that love doesn't end with death, and sometimes we get chances to finish things we left undone. When the broadcast ended, the garage fell into complete silence. Michael, Emma, and David sat staring at the radio, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, David spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. She knew about the basketball tryouts. I never told anyone I was thinking about trying out again. Emma nodded slowly. She knew I was scared about college. I never said anything, but she knew. Michael stood up and walked over to the radio, placing his hand on its worn surface. She wants me to open that box. I've been avoiding it since she died because she made me promise never to look inside while she was alive. Back in Cedar Ridge, the second broadcast had created even more chaos. Dr. Reeves was frantically checking and rechecking her equipment, finding the same impossible results as before. The paranormal investigators were convinced they were witnessing genuine afterlife communication, while skeptics searched desperately for evidence of an elaborate hoax. But it was Sarah's specific warnings that began to change people's minds. The Hendersons, despite feeling foolish for taking advice from what might be a ghost, took their baby to a specialist who discovered the exact heart condition Sarah had mentioned. The county inspector found dangerous structural damage to the County Road 15 bridge, damage that could have caused a catastrophic collapse within weeks. Most dramatically, Mrs. Chun passed Sarah's advice to her son, who adjusted his interview approach and landed a job he'd been trying to get for months. These weren't vague predictions or general advice. They were specific, actionable information that proved accurate time and time again. By Friday evening, even the most hardened skeptics were beginning to question their assumptions. Whatever was happening at KWIN, it wasn't following any known rules of reality. The investigation expanded to include physicists, theologians, and researchers from several universities, all trying to understand how a dead woman's voice was somehow broadcasting vital information to her community. Michael made the drive back to Cedar Ridge on Saturday morning, leaving Emma and David with their uncle. He needed to open that box, and he needed to do it alone. As he pulled into his driveway, past the lingering reporters and curious neighbors, He felt like he was walking toward answers he wasn't sure he was ready to receive. The house felt different somehow, not as empty as it had been, but charged with possibility and mystery. Michael walked to their bedroom and opened the closet, pushing aside the winter coat Sarah would never wear again. Behind them, exactly where she'd said it would be, was a small wooden box he'd noticed but never questioned over their 22 years of marriage. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid, not knowing what secrets his wife had kept hidden or why she'd chosen now, from beyond the grave, to share them with him. Inside the wooden box, Michael found treasures that took his breath away. There were dozens of letters, each one addressed to a different person in their community, written in Sarah's careful handwriting. The dates on the letters showed they'd been written over the past year, during her illness. Some were addressed to him and the children, but many others bore the names of friends, neighbors, and regular listeners. At the bottom of the box was a thick journal and a letter marked "For Michael, to be opened after my death." His hands shook as he unfolded the familiar stationery. "My dearest Michael," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then my voice has found its way back to you somehow. I always believed it would, though I never knew exactly how it would happen. The radio was always my connection to our community, and I had faith that love would find a way to keep that connection alive, even after I was gone." Michael sank onto their bed, reading with growing amazement as Sarah explained what she'd discovered during her final months. While battling cancer, she'd become increasingly sensitive to what she could only describe as the spaces between things, moments of clarity where she could sense connections and futures that hadn't yet unfolded. "I started having dreams about conversations I hadn't had yet," her letter continued. "I would wake up knowing things about people's problems before they told me, understanding solutions to issues that hadn't even occurred yet. At first, I thought it was just the medication, but the dreams kept coming true." The journal contained detailed records of these premonitions, along with Sarah's attempts to understand what was happening to her. She'd documented dozens of instances where her dreams had provided her with accurate information about future events in the lives of their friends and neighbors. She'd used this knowledge subtly during her radio shows, offering advice and support that seemed naturally intuitive but was actually based on her mysterious glimpses of the future. "I realized during my last weeks that death might not be the end of my ability to help the people I love," the letter explained. "The connection I felt to our community through the radio was growing stronger, not weaker, as my body failed. I began to understand that consciousness might be more flexible than we think, especially when it's tied to something as powerful as love and purpose." Michael found letters addressed to dozens of people, each containing advice, warnings, or messages of comfort. Sarah had somehow known that Mrs. Chin's son would struggle with his job search, that the Hendersons' baby would need medical attention, that the bridge would become dangerous. She'd written it all down, preparing for the possibility that she might somehow be able to share this information after her death. The most surprising discovery was a letter addressed to Dr. Patricia Reeves, whom Sarah had never met but somehow knew would investigate the broadcasts. The letter contained detailed explanations of the technical anomalies the scientist would find, along with theories about how consciousness might be able to manipulate electromagnetic fields under certain conditions. "Love changes everything, even the laws of physics," Sarah had written to the skeptical professor. "When someone's entire purpose becomes serving others, that purpose can become stronger than the boundaries between life and death." As Michael read through the journal and letters, he began to understand the full scope of what Sarah had planned. She'd somehow known that her voice would return to the radio waves, and she'd prepared messages for everyone who would need them. The timing, the specific information, the personal touches that had convinced everyone the broadcasts were real, it had all been planned and documented before her death. But there was one more surprise waiting in the box. At the very bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was a small digital recording device. A note attached to it read, "For the final broadcast, play this on Sunday morning at 6 a.m. through the Blue Radio." Sunday morning found Michael back at his brother's garage, with Emma and David flanked beside him. Word had spread about the recording device, and Dr. Reeves had driven down to witness what might be Sarah's final message. Robert Chin was there too, along with several other community members who had become part of this impossible story. At exactly 6 o'clock, Michael pressed play on the recording device and held it close to the blue radio speakers. Sarah's voice filled the garage one last time. But this recording was different from the live broadcasts, calmer, more peaceful, with an ethereal quality that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical world. "My dear Cedar Ridge family," Sarah began, "this is my final message to you all. By now, Michael has found the box, and you understand that these broadcasts were both miraculous and planned. I want you to know that love really is the strongest force in the universe, strong enough to bend the rules of reality when it's needed most." She went on to explain that her connection to the radio waves was fading, that this would be the last time her voice would reach them from beyond. But she had one final gift to share: the locations of all the letters she'd written, hidden throughout the community for people to find when they needed them most. "Mrs. Patterson, there's a letter for you behind the loose brick in the community center's east wall. Tommy Rodriguez, check the hollow tree by the old swimming hole where you used to hide treasures as a boy. Each of you who needs guidance or comfort will find what I've left for you when the time is right." The broadcast ended with Sarah singing the lullaby she'd always sung to Emma and David when they were small, her voice fading gradually until only silence remained. This time, everyone knew the silence was permanent. Over the following weeks, people throughout Cedar Ridge found the letters Sarah had hidden for them. Each message was perfectly timed, appearing exactly when the recipient most needed guidance or comfort. Mrs. Patterson found her letter on the day she'd planned to give up hope about her husband's treatment. Tommy Rodriguez discovered his on the anniversary of his father's death, when grief was overwhelming him. Dr. Reeves published a paper about the broadcasts that became one of the most controversial scientific documents of the year. She could neither explain what had happened nor dismiss it as fraud. The evidence was too strong, the results too specific and verifiable. She concluded that consciousness might be far more complex and powerful than modern science understood. The old blue Motorola never produced another mysterious broadcast, though Michael kept it plugged in for months, hoping. Eventually, he donated it to the Cedar Ridge Historical Society, where it sits in a place of honor alongside a plaque that reads, "In memory of Sarah Martinez, whose voice proved that love transcends every boundary." KWIN hired a new morning host, a young woman named Lisa who brought her own warmth and energy to the community. She never tried to replace Sarah. That would have been impossible. But she carried on the tradition of using radio as a force for connection and caring. On quiet mornings, when the equipment was working perfectly and the signal was particularly clear, Lisa sometimes felt like she wasn't broadcasting alone, as if someone with experience and love was guiding her words. Michael, Emma, and David gradually learned to live with their loss, but also with the incredible gift they'd been given. They'd been allowed to say goodbye properly, to receive final messages of love and guidance, and to understand that death wasn't really an ending, just a different kind of beginning. The story of Sarah's broadcast spread far beyond Cedar Ridge, inspiring researchers to investigate the connections between consciousness, love, and the physical world. Some called it the greatest hoax ever perpetrated, others the most important paranormal event in human history. But for the people who lived through it, who heard Sarah's voice returning to them with love and wisdom from beyond death, the truth was simpler and more powerful than any scientific explanation. Love really was stronger than death, and sometimes, when people needed it most, that love found a way to reach across the impossible distance between worlds, carrying voices of hope through the endless static of existence. The signal had gone out, but its message would resonate through Cedar Ridge forever, a reminder that some connections are too strong for even death to break. Years later, when people talked about the 3 weeks when their beloved radio host came back from the dead, they didn't focus on the mystery or the scientific impossibility. They remembered the comfort, the guidance, and the proof that someone who had loved them in life continued to love them beyond it. In a world full of uncertainty and loss, Sarah Martinez had given them the most precious gift imaginable, the knowledge that love never really ends. It just finds new ways to make itself heard.